Neuro Nutrition / neuroscience. I am beyond excited to tackle this subject today. We'll be focusing on words that seem to be the buzzwords these days for wellness, like intermittent fasting, inflammation, adrenal fatigue, sleep optimization, fat loss, keto, CrossFit, and the list goes on. So joining me in studio today is Chett Binning, the founder of Brain Ignition. Now, the company provides evidence-based tools to athletes in order to improve energy, recovery, and overall brain health. And while studying at Western University, he specialized in immune responses and the effects exercise actually has on the brain. So everything about this topic today has me giddy. So welcome to Living Your Life with Lianne Laing, the podcast brought to you by Extension Marketing. And as always, for more information, you can check out extensionmarketing.com. Chett, I'm so excited to have you in here.
So am I. Thank you very much for that intro.
Oh, well, I loved looking at all the information and knowing just how many topics we were going to be able to hit on today. I figured I would at least start because there's a whole background and I love the story as to how people get in on this. But when you say neuroscience or neuro nutrition, did I explain it a little bit like what are we talking about?
Yeah, so neuro nutrition essentially, so this is nutrition with a focus on brain health. So it's how the individual macronutrients, micronutrients affect our brain. And so like the goal with all of this is it's because from what I've learned in my own experiences, it's how we feel on a daily basis, energy, performance. It's a top-down effect, right? So it's like, our brain controls everything. So it's targeting the brain, and then things like, fat loss, performance, energy, recovery. These are all side effects. So I really do. I'm not someone who says, someone comes to me and they say, here's my goals, what can I do to achieve weight loss, yada, yada, yada. Like fat loss is never my number one goal. Can I help you achieve that? Yes. But again, I look at these things as a side effect by kind of, again, optimizing brain health. That's kind of that's how you, like, if you're at a dinner table and someone's like, hey, Chett, what is it that you do? Yeah. You're like, and then you'd say, well, you see that broccoli that you're eating, that's actually going to add a different. There's a lot more to it than that. And I think we'll get into it, but
totally. I think I like getting into oftentimes is the backstory as to how this comes about, because the way people end up in the work that they do, I think is fascinating. And usually, especially in this industry, there's a reason for it. And, as an athlete yourself growing up, I'm like, there was an interest, or I would think that there was an understanding of what was going to help you be a better athlete.
Yes. My story is, it's definitely not typical in that some people who end up studying a master's in neuroscience, I shouldn't say this, I don't know for sure, but I don't think most people took the path I took. So it's kind of a funny one, to be honest. So I'll just go back to like high school, because it's people who knew me in high school and kind of haven't seen me since, but follow me on the socials now, are just like, wait, this is Chett? Are you sure?
The same guy?
And I've even heard of one of my old high school teachers essentially just, this was her like to a T, like could not believe when she found out through the grapevine that I was doing these things. Just to jump in, I was your typical, male 15 to 18 year old in high school, loved to play sports. That's all I really cared about. Hockey being my number one choice. And of course, school was always second. I would play on 3 sports teams at the same time. I would go to school maybe 2-3 days a week. That's not to say my marks were crap. I still got by, but it was always just like, I don't really care.
Right. The focus wasn't on academics. It wasn't to say that you couldn't, had you applied yourself, it would have been different, but there was no need at the time. And I think you explain it really quite well. A Canadian boy who plays hockey and is a good hockey player. The focus is there.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Knew I wanted to go to university. So again, this is important. I applied to kinesiology at several different schools, had my mind set on, I was going to take kin because like you said, I was fascinated with human body performance, how it works. Long story short, I kind of got talked out of that and ended up.
Why talked out of it?
So my older sister, who was about, I shouldn't mess this up, she's like 5 or 6 years older than me, 4 or 5. She took kin before me. Didn't really have the best of luck finding a job right away. That was around the time where it was difficult to find a job immediately with kin. Like you had to keep going afterwards. It was kind of just like mostly family, bit of friends, just kind of saying like, Chet, maybe this isn't the best route, yada, yada, yada. My brother was a cop. I thought that was pretty cool too. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll take criminology. Like, I'm going to be a cop, or maybe I'll take crim, but then end up being a fireman, something like that. Right. Whatever. Okay. So yeah, also at this time, so I played 4 years of junior B hockey in Stratford prior to going to university. Any hockey players listening, junior B in Southwestern Ontario is a little bit different than the junior B here. It's I guess it's kind of our equivalent to the tier 2 junior A, like Ottawa Junior Sen's good example there. It's not quite there, but it's kind of in between those two levels here in Ottawa. So yeah, I finished that out. And then when I came to Carleton, I wasn't recruited to play on the team. So when I came to Carleton, I played 4 years on the varsity hockey team. Was never recruited. I was a walk-on. And that was a pretty special moment for me, because most of that team is like OHL, QMJHL.
Yeah, I know that team. You know the recruiting process, and they've got a top pick for a program that people are vying to get in on this program. So when you go to school, was there anticipation like, I might not play, or I'm... Oh,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the reason why I say that was a special moment to me was because of like the work ethic. It wasn't so much as like, I get to keep playing, but when I look back on that now, like, I'm just proud that I kind of put the work in and kind of beat the odds per se. And I've definitely taken that work ethic and applied it to this.
But you were saying that you really weren't applying your academics. We know that you didn't do it through high school, but you yet managed to get into Carleton, walk onto a pretty amazing hockey program.
Yeah. So still at this point in time, wasn't too worried about school. But again, I got by. I took a full course load while I was playing. It wasn't until, it was third year of my undergrad. So third year taking criminology, I take a third year neuroscience class as an elective. And I didn't have any neuro background. So to be honest, I'm not sure how they let me into the class, because it was like a drugs and pharmacology class or something, like literally how does like marijuana, psilocybin, some other pharmaceuticals actually act in the brain. And like, I was absolutely hooked right away. I was like fascinated. You
were taking this for this criminology degree you were going after.
Yes.
Essentially, as an elective. It wasn't, okay.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that class just triggered everything.
Oh yeah, that was it right there. Yeah. And then I immediately made that my minor, started taking as many neuro classes as I could. Even I debated switching majors, and I decided I was too far along by then, so just kept it my minor. And then one other very, very important thing happened my fourth year. So I had a pretty serious back injury, I would say. I had a disc herniation at L4, L5, a lot of symptoms down the leg. So I had no dorsiflexion, so I couldn't flex my toes towards my knee, for anyone listening. So again, hockey players listening, those first couple strides, your toes are flexed up every single stride. You're on your toes, so you need that power in the ankles. You need that power in the calves. I had none of that. And the only reason I made the team in the first place was because I was one of the best skaters. So that was one thing I always had going for me, and now that was gone. So yeah, fourth year was a write-off. I didn't play at all, basically, because I had these symptoms. I had this back injury. And the reason this was so important is because kind of for the first time in my life, really, I had a lot of free time. And that may sound funny to people because I was taking a full course load, but when you're used to, hours and hours and hours a day practice, you're in the gym after, you're gone every single weekend, you have 2 games, just the recovery aspect. You probably want to go out and celebrate sometimes on the weekend, but all of a sudden I didn't have most of that, and I had so much free time. And this was where I learned the most during university.
But would you also have realized that you weren't going to be able to make hockey wasn't going to be a ticket to anything, right?
I always knew that, though.
So it was just more of a let's switch the focus.
Yes, yeah. It was, okay, I need to kind of start thinking about what's next. But so I had this injury I said I was always curious with human body, how it works. So I started studying basically the anatomy of this human spinal cord, because I never really got to take many classes on that. I wanted to understand my injury, understand what I could do about it.
This is just for your own general knowledge. This wasn't for a class.
No, this was on the side.
Okay.
And that's kind of how it started. I started crushing a ton of podcasts in this kind of, neuro fasting, back health, whatever, inflammation. One thing kind of just spiraled to the next. And then it was around that same time. So that 4th year, I had all this free time, still taking the full course load, but I'm listening to these podcasts. I'm getting more and more passionate about some of the things we're going to talk about today. And it got to the point where I had this weird feeling where I couldn't keep these things inside my head anymore, because I'm 100% introverted. I'm in my own head a lot. I know that now and just accept it. But I felt like I had to get these things out of here. And so the Brain Ignition thing started as I made this separate Brain Ignition Instagram account. I didn't tell anyone I knew about it, because I was still kind of, I care about what people think. I cared about that whole health shaming thing, which is, I grew up in a small town, so that's a real thing. I don't know if it's as bad anymore, but anyways, that's kind of separate.
Explain
so
that.
it's the more and more I think about this, the more it's just so bizarre. And again, this is from the perspective of kid in high school, right? But it's, oh, you're going to the gym. It's Saturday. It's Sunday. Why are you working out? We should be out, partying, having fun. Or it's your birthday. Why would you be active and be healthy on your birthday? Celebrate. And these are just little examples, but this is a real thing. And I'd hazard a guess, it's a real thing in a lot of small towns, at least where I'm from.
The conversation of health, wellness, mind, body, spirit isn't the typical conversation around the dinner tables.
Take it serious. Not everyone. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't want to paint everyone with the same
But your
brush,
experience was that.
Yeah. Because there is a lot of cool things going on in those towns, my hometown, people, promoting health and wellness. But I think most people, especially in this realm, would agree with me that, the percentage of people, it's hard to get through to them on topics like this. So that was, I made the account, but like I said, at the very, very start, it was just an attempt to kind of express my emotions, really is what it was, express my passion, kind of share my knowledge. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. I guess the important thing was I applied to a master's in neuroscience at Western, because I did. So through all that, I had good marks, high 80s. And so I got into the master's in neuroscience, even though I took crim. I had the same credits that I could graduate with a degree in psych, so it wasn't totally foreign.
No, but there was an interest. I think that the school would have seen there's a passion, there was an interest, and there was an academic. You had excelled, that you had the brain capacity to be able to do this. Yeah. What did you find most fascinating? Because you had done so much research on your own prior to actually being in these classes, that once you were actually in these classes in the master's program, what were you gravitating to? As a sponge, your brain is a sponge. What was you soaking in?
So you mean during my undergrad?
No, when you're at Western and taking it, what classes were just hitting you hard? The
way the master's is actually, it's kind of funny in that I only took you only take 2 or 3 classes in the program I was in. Other than that, it's you're in the lab, we see these stereotypical pictures, white lab coat, glasses with this little, it's called a pipette, transferring solutions tube to tube, this crazy, basically white room, beakers everywhere. That was me, daily basis. I'm in there. I did a lot of experiments on mice, but kind of to answer that question, my biggest interest, it wasn't really my major thesis. It was kind of a spin-off of that. Because you mentioned that I studied a lot of neuroinflammation, which is it's inflammation in the brain. A lot of similarities, obviously a ton of differences, but kind of a spin-off of my thesis was that inflammation in the rest of our body do have these direct highways to get into the brain, and then from there they can basically change how we feel on a daily basis. So this was kind of a spin-off from my master's, And this is what I put a lot of like my extra time and free time into, because one thing I'm most passionate about, exercise. And what's exercise? Well, it's a stressor, right? Like when we lift really heavy weights, heavy squats especially, you're breaking down muscle tissue, and that's stimulating an inflammatory response. Like, people don't realize exercise is actually terrible for you. If someone were to go to the doctor and have some basic blood work done after like a hard training session, they didn't know they worked out, the doctor would say like, you're a mess. Like, you need to clean some things up, because that's what it is. It's an inflammatory insult, and then it's our ability to adapt to that, which makes us stronger, fitter, faster.
Okay.
So these are
saying this from a CrossFit athlete. I mean, like, there's one thing to be an athlete and like hit the gym and work out, but I look at what the CrossFit athletes do, and I look at them going, what are they doing to their bodies? Yeah. I look at that and kind of go, that for me is extreme, right? Because you're pushing those muscles, everything to the absolute limit, and then trying to recover and then do it all over again, and increase it by a rep or two, right?
Yeah. And I think that's what led me to CrossFit in the first place, I think. Or that's why I got addicted by it so quickly, is because, so yes, hockey and these other sports have a component where, okay, you need to be in your peak physical condition to perform at your best. But what overrules peak physical condition in those sports? It's skill. I mean, there was guys on my team, especially Carleton, they would, and we kind of chatted about one of those examples beforehand, but at this point in time, those guys, not a lot of them care about physical fitness per se. That's not to say they're not, working hard, but there might be the odd workout where they kind of just, whatever, I don't need this. And then on the ice, they're still the best guy. Well, why? Because they have so much skill. I'm not saying they didn't kind of work at that and earn that over time, but whereas something like CrossFit, you could argue that it is. It's kind of like whoever is in peak, physical condition is going to be the best athlete there. Again, is there a little bit of skill involved? Absolutely. But as much as these other sports, no, I don't think so. Because like you said, what it comes down to, strongest, most aerobically fit, and then who can recover the fastest and do it all again. So who has that capacity? And you can't say that about another sport. That's why I'm so fascinated with CrossFit, is because I take all this kind of what I learned in my master's, what I now study on my own, which is, okay, how can we reach kind of this peak level of optimal performance? And then, CrossFit's the perfect place to apply it, really. You were just in the city. You were here, you were doing these seminars and you're doing these workshops. And I want to be able to kind of go, because you're talking about this optimal performance, right? And you're looking at it from this, you have this CrossFit background. And then I'm looking at it too from, I want to be able to reach the person sitting on the couch. Yes.
I want to be able to reach the mom trying to kind of feel better after, 9 months after having a baby. Yeah. I want to get to the 50-year-old man who's like, I got to do something because this once a week hockey isn't quite doing it for me, kind of thing. Like, there are so many different people and such a broad spectrum that we can reach. And yet you're creating these seminars that hit on so many different aspects. Yes. How did you break that down? Like, once you created this brain ignition company, to know that you'd be able to have a different reach like this? I had to identify what the biggest problems are that people have. What are the most common symptoms or health complaints that people have on a daily basis? So it's the things what
like...
What are they? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the brain fog when you first wake up in the morning. It's, nasty hunger, cravings, and pains at times you probably shouldn't experience it. It's, either not being able to get to sleep, or when you do get to sleep, you're waking up several times throughout the night. And then in the morning, same thing, you have that brain fog, you don't feel well rested. The list kind of goes on and on and on, but it's a good tie-in actually to the Neuro Nutrition, because when I see, so the average individual, when they see these things or feel these things, most of the times, what would they chalk it up to? What would you say? If I'm not feeling well? Yeah. Or just the average person, something like a symptom like that.
I'm going to give you an answer because it's like something I ate, something I did, not enough sleep. Not for me. It's like I feel certain ways if I don't get my exercise in.
Right.
But I'm looking at it. I mean, I know this information.
So that's definitely not the average answer. The average answer would be, oh, I'm just getting old, right? Or something like that. Or wait till you get to my age, or this is just the way it is. And from my perspective, I'm like I actually hate that answer. I hate that belief. I hate that. Yeah. But so from my perspective, Neuro Nutrition will know these are all different kind of physiological mechanisms that we can actually now go and look into. Like if I take the sleep as the simplest example, well, what's one reason why you can't get to sleep at night? Could be because your cortisol is high before bedtime. So cortisol, not all bad. I want people to realize that because we often demonize that. Cortisol is totally necessary for survival. Problem is when you have cortisol high at the wrong times. So you want it high first thing in the morning. You want it low before you go to bed. Okay, so maybe high cortisol before bed is an issue. So why might that be? Lots of possibilities. Maybe too much caffeine in the afternoon. Stress would be the obvious example. And I mean both physical and emotional stress. So, work stress, stress with family life, so on and so forth. That could have your cortisol high before bed. And then there's other examples. Too much exposure to artificial light before you go to bed. Exercise right before you go to bed. These are some other examples that could have that cortisol high. So again, that's one little thing. So this could impair how you get to sleep. Well, that kind of sets off this chain reaction where, if you have a poor sleep, you wake up tired, you're probably going to dose that with caffeine. And so just from this one simple little example, I would go in and say, okay, first of all, how can we improve your sleep by lowering your cortisol? And by lowering your cortisol at night, that means we have to also look at cortisol first thing in the morning. So you see how kind of all these things begin to tie together? Well,
it's a domino effect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So are you working with clients then that are coming to you because they're not able to sleep? And are you have clients coming to you that are trying to get to their next peak performance level at a high aspect of sport?
This podcast is brought to you by Extension Marketing. They are a new breed of marketing agency that acts as your virtual marketing department, designing and implementing cost-effective marketing strategies that will grow your business. I can speak to this personally, as I've been using the Extension Marketing team to help me launch and grow my business. Founder Pat Whalen has been a lifesaver for me, a genuine coach, guiding me along the way into uncharted territory. Tell them you're a friend of the show and receive a free 1-hour consultation. Check them out at extensionmarketing.com.
It's a bit of both, but so yeah, there is a lot of kind of quote unquote what you could call average Joes. It's just people who, I have some nurses, some firemen. So the common trend with that is shift work. Yep.
Right.
But even just like teachers, people who work in an office. So it is a wide spectrum. But for those people, mostly there's still of course, the most popular goal of, I want to lose weight, I want to improve body composition. But when I do this in-depth assessment with people, I uncover all these other things that are essentially preventing them from achieving that fat loss or weight loss goal. And so
what are these factors usually? So you say people are coming to you for, body composition or fat loss, and then you're like, but there's all these other factors. What would some of those actually be?
That are preventing them from the weight loss? Yeah. So sleep is a good example, what we just talked about. Too much stress is another example. Actually, and I'm not surprised anymore, but when I first started working, there's one specific scenario where it just kept coming up. And it's people working out too much and not eating enough. And then they get into this. There's a lot of potential names for this and a lot of potential things it can lead to. The most classic would be quote unquote adrenal fatigue. I don't like that term.
What does that term mean? Because it's one of these buzzwords, right? You're starting to hear it now, but I don't know if people understand what it is.
So it's burnout is what it is. feeling chronically tired, not well rested. You have that tired but wired effect. So you're just exhausted until you go to bed and lay down and your heart's still racing. A lot of other possibilities, maybe lack of motivation. Your sex drive has gone down. For women, it could be loss of period. So there's a lot of possibilities. But so this buzzword, adrenal fatigue, I personally don't like that term. It's kind of inaccurate because that suggests that our adrenal glands are what produce this stress response by releasing cortisol. It suggests that those have just kind of tired out, but that's not what's going on. It's a change, and this is the Neuro Nutrition. It's a change in the signals that your adrenal glands are receiving from your hypothalamus in your brain. So the proper term would be HPA axis dysfunction, or hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction, but you can't, that's not as...
That's why your high school teachers were going, he's talking about what? Okay, so that was a complicated scientific explanation. What is the layman's term for that, like understanding?
Yes, so what is adrenal fatigue? So it's the stress signals changing from your brain to your adrenals. So it's basically, someone cuts you off in traffic, you start honking the horn, that's your stress response. What I just explained, that release of cortisol from your adrenals, that's what's going on during that stress response. So what this, quote unquote, burnout, adrenal fatigue, HPA axis dysfunction, whatever you want to call it, too much training, not enough calories, this is all, it's just that signaling has just kind of temporarily shut off. So it's not working properly. And if we think about, whenever people are confused about these mechanisms like this, the easiest explanation or the easiest way to help people understand is most of the times these are like survival mechanisms, like adaptive mechanisms, right? So if someone is constantly working out and they're not eating enough, why can't they lose any more weight? Well, because the body says, you are constantly stressing me out with this exercise. You're not giving me enough fuel to fuel these sessions. So I'm going to retain what calories you do give me because these are precious, precious calories. I'm going to hang on to that extra fat so that when we go through these times of stress, these times of not enough calories, I can feed off of that and survive. So that's the perfect example. There's other good examples if we think about like fasting, ketosis and all that too. So.
Do you want to get into that? Okay, so one of the main things, and you have like a number of different modules that you use when you do these presentations. One of the first things that comes up, and I've looked at your stuff, is fasting.
Right.
Or the intermittent fasting. And I've heard a lot of people now are kind of trying to learn more about it or understand it more, or why are they doing it, or what's the purpose of it? So can you explain it? And
definitely.
And why do you think there's been more interest on this subject?
So I guess, do you want me to just explain kind of the basic protocol?
I think
first?
So, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So if anyone hasn't heard, fasting, intermittent fasting, basically it's restricting the hours in a day that you actually consume food. So like a classic example would be this. It's called a 16-8 intermittent fasting window. So this just means that for 16 hours of a day, you're not eating. For the other 8 hours, that's when you're consuming all your calories. So as an example, maybe you eat food from 12 noon until 8 p.m. And then from 8 p.m. during your sleep, during the morning, you're not eating anything, you're fasting. Now
I'm going to say, I think a lot of people don't even know that they're fasting because they just skip, they forget, or they don't have time, and the next thing they know, they hadn't have breakfast or a coffee, and the next thing they know, it's noon, and they're like, oh my god, I need lunch.
Yep.
They don't even realize that they've done it, right? But they're not quite doing it right. Yeah. But yes.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Where this came from in the first place is because, again, it's supposed to trigger these survival mechanisms. And the idea being, so same thing as exercise. Initially, when you fast, when you don't consume calories, it is a stressor to the body. But then your body adapts and says, oh, okay, I need to get stronger, and all these different things. I need to be better able to deal with this stressor in the future. And so I can kind of adapt and become healthier. So I guess another kind of real life example of this or application, there's some research coming up now about, so individuals, cancer patients, prior to them going in for radiation, they'll actually fast individuals because it's basically an upgrade to all of their healthy cells. So if people don't know what radiation does, radiation, it kills the cancer cells, but it shows no mercy. It also kills your healthy cells. So by fasting beforehand, it kind of upgrades your healthy cells so that they're better able to resist that radiation and essentially live afterwards. So they find that in some cases, people are able to bounce back faster after radiation if they do a fast beforehand. The other classic fasting and cancer example is there's something called the Warburg effect, which means some cancer cells can only live off of sugar, like literally, carbohydrates, glucose. And so what fasting does is we know that when we fast, oftentimes we're restricting the sugar intake. Our body, and this is where it kind of gets into the keto stuff too, our body will then switch to burning these ketones as energy. And a lot of cancers just do not have the ability to use these ketones. So they literally starve to death. So this is another kind of cool area of fasting research.
Is there a certain amount of food that you need to be having prior to that 8 o'clock cutoff that, okay, at the 8 o'clock, we're starting the fast?
Yeah. So I'm happy you asked that, because this kind of leads into, I would say, the biggest mistake that people make when fasting. So
because people are doing it, I just don't think they're doing it.
No, they're properly. Not. They're not. What's the biggest thing we see on social media? It's intermittent fasting burns fat, right? That's kind of the go-to, the biggest buzz. So this probably news to a lot of people. Fasting itself, the intermittent fasting, does not automatically increase fat loss. That's just the way it is. There's no mechanism during the fast that says, okay, body, I'm going to get you to start burning fat faster. So let me give you a simple example. So person A, person B, just consider them as clones, essentially, just for sake of example. So person A is consuming 2,000 calories from noon till, say, 4 p.m. So that's person A's intermittent fasting, right? Okay, person B consuming the exact same amount of calories, 2,000, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So that's normal eating window. So person A, intermittent fasting, person B, longer eating window, but they're eating the same amounts. So in those examples, there's no difference to fat loss. And studies have shown this. They'll compare these groups of people who are on so this is called isocaloric, when they consume the exact same amount of calories, and they find that the fast does not increase the fat loss at all. So that's kind of, again, most important thing right there. Now, that being said, is it harder to consume all of your calories in a restricted window? Absolutely. If I probably eat, say, 3,000 to 3,500 calories a day. For me to try and get that in 4 hours, pretty difficult. So what's going to happen? Well, I'm probably going to end up eating less, 2,500 or something like that. So that's what leads to the fat loss. It's kind of this.
It's because you were reducing your
exactly.
calories.
Yeah. People forget that kind of when it comes to weight loss, fat loss, still the number one most important thing is calories in versus calories out. Are you consuming extra energy than you're expending, or are you consuming less than you're expending? That's what it comes down to. Is it the only one? No. And I hate when people say that it is the only factor. And that's why I focus on all these other mechanisms and kind of different things going on in the body, but that's still the number one most important thing.
Okay, can I just say, though, because before you said if the body knows that it's not going to get calories, it's going to start to say, okay, well, I'm just going to start to save them. If I know that you're not going to be, you're giving them to me, they're going to be holding on to it. So at what point does that stop being the case?
Like, you mean at what point does the body kind of trigger that stress response?
Yes.
So that's the kind of $1 million question, right? And that's part of my job, is to figure out who's in that scenario. How can people avoid getting to that scenario? So there's no one answer. It depends.
Okay. One, do you suggest intermittent fasting?
Again, it depends. Yeah. People hate that answer, but that's...
Well, what does it depend on?
So it depends on the amount of stress you're under, for one. So if someone is incredibly stressed in their day-to-day life, which I can pick up on from the assessments I use,
right,
fasting would not be good for them. Because again, remember, fasting, it's a stressful stimulus. So to use the bathtub analogy, if someone already has a full bathtub of stress, of water, throwing that fasting on top of that and adding a bit extra water, it's just going to overflow. The other hand, if they have no water in the bathtub, or it's pretty low, you want to add a little bit of stress to that and bring that up a bit. So that's kind of rule number one.
Okay, you're adding it.
Yes.
You have to think of it that it's a stress factor.
You do, yeah. People forget that.
Okay.
Yes.
Also, people who think that they're doing it properly, but they're making a ton of mistakes. Right? Yeah. They think that they're doing the fasting right. What are some common mistakes that they make?
Yeah, milk and coffee, because that's sugar, right? As soon as you give your body that sugar, it's like a signal to tell the body, okay, there's calories coming in, fast over.
So even if you think, okay, well, I stopped eating at 8, I'm not really eating till noon, but I need that morning coffee.
So black is okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But as soon as you add your cream or your sweetener or your sugar, you're done.
Yep.
So you've at that moment ended the fast.
Essentially, yeah. Yep. If you want to get 100% of the benefits of fasting, you've ended the fast. So that's probably the most common mistake. But here's where it gets a little confusing, is like, okay, what can I actually get away with? So you've probably heard of like MCT oil, or brain octane, those?
Yes.
Yeah. So
that's like the bulletproof stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the brain octane.
So this is where it gets a little bit confusing, because a little bit of something like MCT oil or brain octane, or even a little bit of coconut oil, it's kind of like, how can I explain that? So you're still able to get kind of some of the benefits of the fast, if not all. Excuse me. And the reason being is because so they're fats is what they are. They're different kind of fats. Those fats that you consume, the MCT, the coconut, that's keeping our insulin and our blood glucose low. So this is why, and this is kind of a slippery slope when I say you can use a little bit of this, but that's essentially why you can still get a lot of the benefits from fasting if you're only using something like that, like a tablespoon of MCT oil or coconut oil. You
can use that during your fast before you start eating again at say 12.
Yeah. And again, you're not going to get the full benefits because that's energy coming in. But like I said, because it's not leading to that, that spike in insulin, that spike in blood glucose, you'll still get some of the benefits. And that's kind of like grossly simplifying it. But yeah, that's kind of, so when I did this module on the weekend, the fasting.
What questions are you getting from the audience? Like, what are they asking?
Yeah, it's usually that one, like, what can I have during the fast? Or it's, does it burn fat? What's the best eating window? The BCAAs come up a lot too, and that's a hard no.
So BCA?
Yeah, so the branched chain amino acids, probably the most common, supplement that people use before a workout or during a workout. If you're having this during a fast, you're definitely not fasting. That's like a hard no. And if you want to know why, I can tell you, but...
What's the hard no?
Just that, yeah. So just that if you have these BCAAs or these essential amino acids during your fast, so this is stimulating something called mTOR. It's mammalian target of rapamycin. Again, some people like to know the full phrase. this is why we build muscle. This is how we build muscle. So when someone trains and then goes to crush that post-workout protein shake, they're triggering this pathway. They're triggering that mTOR, because this leads to muscle protein synthesis. It builds muscle. So why does that matter for fasting? Well, because this pathway is complete. It's essentially completely opposite of fasting. So this pathway they just can't happen at the same time, because they're completely opposite mechanisms. It's like going in different directions in the city. That's the simplest.
Like you think you're going north, but as soon as you take this shake, you're immediately turning south.
Yeah, exactly. They just can't happen together, because this mTOR, so that muscle building, this is building things up. Whereas during a fast, we're actually breaking things down. So it's completely opposites.
Is there anyone that you really think this works really well for?
Yes.
Someone who's not stressed, is getting plenty of sleep, doesn't have that big of an appetite.
Well, no, I'm happy you asked that, because I'm happy you asked that because it sounds like I've just been bashing fasting. Meanwhile, I'm someone who actually encourages it a lot.
Okay, well, who are you encouraging it for? Yeah. And then who are you saying, honestly, this is not for you? Because some people are trying every single thing and fad that they can try.
Yeah.
And they don't see results.
Yeah, so I'll just...
Or they're miserable.
Yeah, I'll just simplify it. Fasting not for people who are very, very stressed on a daily basis. Fasting not for... people who have hypothyroidism, another good example, shouldn't be fasting. If you suspect you have this burnout, not a good option. And then even a lot of, and I'll kind of explain this in a minute, but even a lot of competitive athletes, it's probably not the best option. But who's this for? Because I haven't really said that yet. So yes, some athletes can benefit from it for sure, because I mentioned earlier that when you don't have calories coming in, your body is more prone to use fat for fuel, right? Mm-hmm. This is where it gets so confusing, because using fat for fuel does not mean fat loss automatically. So you have to think of our body as like a hybrid engine, essentially. So you can use gasoline or electricity. So carbs are the gasoline, fats are the electricity. But just keep in mind that like the actual weight you lose or the fat you lose it's kind of separate from that. So let's just push that to the side for a second. So imagine an athlete who can only burn gasoline, and then imagine an athlete who can burn gasoline and electricity. Obviously, the second one's going to be better. So what the fasting can do is help an athlete burn both those fuel sources. Because you're going into that workout with no energy, and then it forces the body to adapt and switch fuel sources. So there's a lot of benefit to that, right? Because if an athlete, type of athlete, you name it, if an athlete doesn't have to constantly crush those gels, the Gatorades, whatever, they're going to be better off.
You don't recommend the gels, the Gatorades?
Well, I'm not saying they're all bad. I'm just saying if you have to rely on that like every 30 minutes or so, then you could be better. Okay,
so you mentioned the Gatorade, which I'm going to then look at as the electrolytes, right? Or what's in it. And I always kind of laugh that, parents sometimes will give their kids like these Gatorades when they're going on a field for a little bit, or they're going to play hockey. Like, you don't need to be replacing those electrolytes. They're not... When does this come, right? When does this come into actual play? Sometimes I find people just, I don't know, they like the look of it maybe, like when they're being active. And it's like,
the marketing,
they've done a great job, but it's not needed a lot of the time.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. So when do you need those, are you saying?
Well, because you're saying, right, you just mentioned the athletes that don't need to take the gels or don't need to take these are going to have better results in the long term. Yep. But there are people that are taking them. So why and what are they seeing?
So if you are, I'll kind of just focus on the electrolytes.
The marketing has been amazing around it, right?
Yeah, it's insane. I think a lot of like athletes who are constantly sweating for like hours on end, a Gatorade, in my opinion, is there better options? Yeah, that aren't loaded with artificial sweeteners. But at that point in time, it's not the worst of options. But I totally agree in that.
But they've been going for hours.
Oh, yeah.
Like you look at like a Roger Federer and, a Nadal totally match, different. Right? That's a 4-hour match.
Yes.
It's different than a kid going to play, their house league hockey and they're on the ice for a certain amount of time, it's not the same thing.
No, it's definitely not. And the worst is like using it as a substitute for water. That's the worst. Is, wake up in the morning, I'm thirsty. Okay, I need some Gatorade. I'm having like some
after
lunch.
A night out and you're really
that's different. But like kids, or I'm having some lunch and I need something to wash this down, so I have some Gatorade. Like that's where it's, like you said, not ideal whatsoever. The easiest is just kind of, how long have I been exercising or working out for? Have I been sweating a lot? And if the answer is like, this is totally simplifying, but if the answer is over 60 minutes and I've been sweating that entire time, then sure, Gatorade. But otherwise, there's not really a need for it. I just wanted to mention one more thing about the fasting, because I still didn't really give any good examples as to who it's for. So I know you've had I know of at least one, you've had a keto guest on here before. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming the audience has heard a little bit about some of this before. So, one thing so the ketogenic diet, it mimics fasting, right? This is why it was developed in the first place. So I just want to bring that up because I think it helps people understand this a little bit better. If you want to know the history, this was like 1920s. They found that individuals with epilepsy who were resistant to drugs, so like they gave these patients everything, nothing worked, their seizures kept persisting. They kind of by accident found that when these individuals don't eat, so when they fast, their symptoms go away. Why is that? Okay, well, they didn't really know at the time, but then they said, well, this is cool, but we can't fast people 24/7. So they came up with the keto diet to mimic that state of fasting. So that's important because ketogenic diet, we're producing these ketones. Fasting, we can start to produce these ketones as well. So who is fasting for? Well, there's a lot of people that could benefit from having these ketones present in their bloodstream. Neurological issues to me is kind of the most fascinating field, because once these ketones get into the brain, they're incredibly therapeutic. Kind of this fascinating area of research right now. And then you have some other things going on. They can stimulate like these natural detoxification mechanisms, essentially. They're good for our mitochondria. So these are like the batteries of our cells. Basically, they produce our daily energy. So they can kind of like, strengthen these guys essentially. So these are where some of the benefits start to come in. Now, from like a kind of practical application, who might benefit from fasting? Well, maybe it's someone who they have a tendency to stop on their way to work and grab a crappy breakfast, like donuts, muffins, whatever, because that's just like, it's kind of just like stimulus habit. They just pass it on the way and say, okay, I'm going to eat that. And then maybe for the rest of the day, once they get to work, they're okay because the options aren't there. So it's like, okay, well, let's implement this fast, and then you'll be at work and you don't have that option anymore. So you're fine. So that's kind of like an example of a practical application.
But they're hungry.
Yeah. So you just have to get used to it. And you'll adapt. You can adapt to that not being hungry at that point in time anymore and push that back.
What about all of the doctors and all of the things that breakfast is the most important meal of the day? Sorry, I'm going to put you on the spot,
no,
right? But
okay.
by fasting until noon, you're going against the mindset of breakfast is the most important.
So here's another, this will answer that. Here's another kind of the most common mistake is people fast until noon. You'd actually be better off eating in the morning and then end eating earlier. So this is kind of backwards. So instead of that 12 to 8 eating window, you'd be better off eating from say 7 a.m. until, like 4 or 5 p.m. Reason being is because this supports it's called our circadian rhythm. So again, you have to remember, like, our brain is still living like thousands and thousands of years ago. Like, not much has changed in our brain since that point in time. So what that means is the sun is a massive trigger for us. So what their circadian rhythm is it's controlled by the sunlight, but it regulates everything. It determines, so this circadian rhythm determines when you feel hungry, how you deal with that food you're eating, when you're most energized, how well you can detox, how well you can deal with inflammation. So another thing, like they call it like the 5 F's, like, and I can't mention all of them, but it's like feeding, fighting, fear, another one I can't mention. So just these basic survival mechanisms are all controlled by this circadian rhythm. So kind of back to this idea of fasting. When the sun goes down, our body is not designed to handle incoming calories. So this is why if you eat a massive meal and then try and go to bed, it's not going to happen, because it's just backwards. It heats your body up at a time when it should be cooling down. It's basically stimulating your digestive function at a time when that should be like recovering and recuperating. There's all these different things. Even your ability to deal with sugars is technically better in the morning than it is at nighttime. So these are just some of the factors that go into, if you're going to fast, you're actually better off doing it earlier. And again, this is another one of those very, very contradictory between what we see on social media versus what the research actually says. Because they have done these before where they compare these two groups. One's going to use this fasting window later, the other one's going to use the early one. And most of the benefits, like the improvements to, the metabolic markers, the triglycerides, these natural detox pathways, all these reasons we do fasting in the first place, they only get that in those early eating windows. So does that answer your question?
Well, it does. And hopefully for people who have been trying to do this, there's maybe an understanding of what they were doing right or what they were doing wrong, or if it's even worth it for them to be doing it in the first place. There will be people, and what if they're doing it right, and if they're the right person for this, what benefit do they really get at the end of the day
from the fasting?
Yeah.
So you'll get a lot of those improvements to your metabolic markers, like blood glucose, insulin sensitivity. So a lot of markers that would essentially, if I'm to simplify it, protect you from diabetes, basically.
Okay. So are we battling? Is this fighting off illness? Is this fighting off how we feel, inflammation? Is it fighting off?
That's a good one too. Yeah.
Like other disease, the aging process, like. Why even go through all of this in the first place? So what am I going to see at the end of the day?
It is. It's reversing these aging processes. It's preventing these chronic illnesses. It's improving neurological function and health, reducing inflammation. Yeah, so all of these.
Okay. And you could do these, and let's say we do it at the right hours and we're the right person for this. I would assume that the food that's being consumed during those hours also plays a huge effect.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not like, okay, I'm going to fast and that gives you the go ahead to go have that Big Mac and the soda and anything else, right?
Yeah.
That still becomes the critical part, is what you're consuming in that time.
That's right. Yeah. So, and again, this will kind of also determine whether or not fasting is good for someone. Are they prone to like using food as a reward? Because if they are, well, then after that fast, they're probably just going to go and, kind of just consume everything in sight. So yeah, that's a good point. Like food quality always matters. So yeah, fasting does nothing to cancel any of that out.
Okay, that's the one thing I wanted to talk about. We had talked a little bit about sleep optimization, and that's a big thing that you focus on.
Yeah.
In all of this, we're talking kind of this brain, and you were talking inflammation, you were talking about things. I've had a lot of people sitting with the chair that you're in, that a lot of it stems from gut health, right? So a lot of people, and especially naturopath, they're looking at it from everything stems from the gut.
Yeah.
And then I have you kind of talking a lot of it stemming from the brain. So how do we...
Yeah.
Is there a shared dialogue, like where?
Yeah. So I don't want to say it's only the brain, because we have connections between the gut and the brain. So yeah, gut is another massively important thing.
But you were talking about inflammation in the brain, right? And I'm thinking if there's inflammation in the gut,
it's going to the brain.
It's going to the brain,
exactly.
And vice versa, right?
Yeah.
But what's the difference between an inflammation in the gut and an inflammation in the brain?
Well, so a lot of the times they're the same thing or one of the same. Because this is what I studied during my master's. It's okay, how does inflammation in our gut or in the rest of our body actually get into the brain? So I can't really. Well, take an example of like have you heard of, say, like SIBO, like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or something like that?
No, but you can share it with us.
Yeah. So, well, let's just say just gut inflammation. We can just say gut inflammation. Okay. Like if you have gut inflammation, well, there's a good chance that your gut lining, which is what keeps everything inside your gut in there's a good chance that that's going to open up. So I think a lot of people have heard of this. It's called gut permeability, which is going to let, we'll say, those inflammatory signals seep out into your circulation, and that's how it's going to get into the brain. So that's how those are connected, right? Does that doesn't really answer?
No, but then what's the difference? Gut health, you're not feeling well. Inflammation to the brain is doing what?
Oh, so yeah, sorry, that's a good point. So if you have inflammation in the brain, this could represent, every symptom in the book: brain fog, headaches, anxiety, stress, lack of motivation. I can tell you that there is not a neurological issue that does not have an underlying inflammation aspect. Now, is it a chicken or the egg? Like, did the inflammation lead to that illness, or did the illness lead to the inflammation? You can't really say with all of these conditions, but inflammation in the brain is, even Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, concussion, ALS, depression, these all have massive inflammatory responses in the brain.
So when you list all of these things, right, or someone who suffers from concussions, what are they doing? How are they healing? How do we heal ourselves then when you realize that there is this happening? Yeah,
that's a good question. Concussion especially is something I'm very, very passionate about, because I do think that they put zero emphasis whatsoever on nutrition after concussion. That's not their fault. It's just the knowledge just isn't out there. And to me, that's like, are you kidding me? Like, the things we could be doing to help this is just insane. So some actual examples. And again, before I say this, I'm obviously not a doctor, so this isn't health advice. This is just, put it this way, if I had a concussion, I'm probably going to do some of the following things. So fish oil is a massive one, the omega-3s, because we know that those are powerful anti-inflammatories. There's some other things going on, but that's the biggest one. And again, there is studies supporting this. So these, back to the kind of the keto thing, if we can get these ketones circulating in our blood, that would help. Because one of the things that's going on post-concussion is there's this 50% increase in the need for energy. So our need for energy is higher than usual. However, post-concussion, there's a 50% decrease in energy compared to usual. So I always say it's basically the equivalent to going into like a weekend hockey tournament where you have more games, but you ate less than you even would before one single game. So it's the same idea. So the reason why there's this lack of energy is because the brain just kind of temporarily, and again, we don't fully know why, it temporarily is not as efficient at using sugar for energy. So kind of one common thing we see is post-concussion, people think the brain needs energy. So, go crush this pasta, go crush this Gatorade, go eat, a loaf of bread, get those carbs in. And this is kind of where, so first of all, it's not going to provide the energy that the brain needs. But second of all, back to that gut-brain connection, we know those foods aren't good for the gut, so it's probably not going to be good for the brain at that point in time either, right? So how do we get these ketones present? We can jump on a ketogenic diet. That's one option, which I think could be very, very beneficial. But that being said, it still doesn't deliver immediate ketones. So this is where have you talked about exogenous ketones at all?
No.
So the most popular example is Prove It.
This is a brand, so
yes, and I have no affiliation with any of these. I'm just using them as an example. So exogenous ketones are basically, it's a supplement. You literally, it's a supplement you take, and it will increase the ketones in your blood immediately.
Right. And I think a lot of people who are on a ketogenic diet are trying to get themselves into ketosis or trying to create this ability.
Yeah.
And yet they have it now that you can consume the ketones just naturally.
That's right. Yeah. So, and that's kind of I have separate issues with that, but just to stay focused on this. So if this is where I see a lot of application for exogenous ketones, if you supplement this immediately after concussion, well, okay, that suggests that we're getting this immediate energy source into the brain, and ultimately that could facilitate recovery. Now, is there, different qualities of these ketones? Absolutely. Even MCT oil, coconut oil, these are both going to deliver at least some ketones to the brain, which could be therapeutic.
And you were talking about this for concussion recovery, and yet
yes.
This would apply to a lot of illness.
It would, yeah.
Inflammation.
Yeah. And this is some of the stuff they're experimenting with right now too in clinical studies is, do these ketones help Alzheimer's disease? Do they help Parkinson's? There's some clinical trials going on right now looking at this because so these illnesses are so different, yet they have so much in common. So Alzheimer's disease also has this lack of energy where the brain is basically starving. Have you ever heard of someone call Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes?
We had an Alzheimer's.
Really?
We had, but there's constantly new listeners and stuff.
Yeah.
So I realized, and I hadn't known, the difference between the Alzheimer's and the dementia and how far and the varying aspects of it and how diabetes played a massive factor. Yeah.
So that plays into this. So I just bring that up because it's like Alzheimer's looks like diabetes of the brain, and that. Okay, we can consume all the energy we want, but the brain is like resistant to that. It's just, if I had the answer, I'd be a billionaire, but it's just resistant to this energy. And so it's kind of starving. Now, the interesting thing, so the brain of, like I said, concussion, the brain of a individual with Alzheimer's disease, well, they can't effectively anymore use glucose, sugars, carbohydrates. Their ability to use these ketones for energy in the brain is completely intact. So this is fascinating. It's like, so if we give this individual with Alzheimer's disease, if we give them these source of ketones, like could this address some of their symptoms? And it does. If I'm to simplify, it's not going to be like a miraculous cure because it doesn't work for 100%, but there is a lot of trials where it at least helps for a lot of patients with Alzheimer's disease. And I don't have to explain, like, even if it's something that allows a little bit more memory for even just a couple hours a day, that's worth it, right? Because the best treatment for Alzheimer's disease right now is, I can't even tell you because there's nothing. That's how little we know. But
you're giving these patients an opportunity for a short amount of time.
Yeah.
To be able to to generate some of that memory.
Exactly.
Even if it's short term.
Yeah.
It's giving them something. You kind of can break so much of this down, and in looking at and in talking to you, I'm assuming right now, based on the CrossFit discussion earlier and the keto, discussion right now, that you are pretty much, as your own practice, a CrossFit keto. Like you are, and some people see it like extreme. Okay, right? To be doing that kind of physical activity and that kind of lifestyle, it's like that's a lot of effort.
People are going to yell at me now, but I'm not keto right now. Is that what you mean?
No, well, that's one. Yes, because I don't think it can be sustained. Like it takes a lot of effort. It's a tough combo, especially if you're doing CrossFit and that kind of at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
So take even like half of you away on half of each of the dimensions and think of the regular person. what are some of the tips that you have in terms of understanding brain nutrition, gut, that they're coming to you for, right? Because people are coming to you, they hear brain ignition. It's kind of like, what are they striving for? What are they needing? And what are they walking away with?
So as in, like, what would I use as an assessment? Is that what you mean?
What are you assessing when they come in? And then what are you changing or shifting when they come in? Because you're dealing with the normal people, and then you're dealing with athletes that are looking for peak performance.
Yeah. This is actually, if I'm to be honest, this is probably the thing that I have the most difficulty explaining. I could talk about these mechanisms and systems all day long.
Yeah, you mentioned words that I have no understanding what you were talking about.
What's the application? Yeah. So I use a lot of subjective questions, actually. Some of subjective questions, like ones that I already gave some examples earlier. So let me just give you the full kind of overview first. So
you're going to have to do it
quickly,
yes. Okay. Because I just looked at the clock.
So I use subjective.
I did not see Veronica's 10-minute warning a while ago. Yes.
So I use a lot of subjective questions, but I break them up into different sections. Each section gives me clues to a specific system in the body. So what are these what are these systems? So these questions, which I'll give you a few examples in a minute, these questions give me clues to, how's their gut health? How do they deal with stress? How do they deal with inflammation? How's their sleep? How do they recover from exercise? So this is that's the kind of zoomed out. So some specific questions, it'll just be things like, I named some earlier. So how long does it take you to get to sleep? If you wake up throughout the night, how many times do you wake up throughout the night? Are you hungry in the morning? How's your sex drive first thing in the morning? Do you need a coffee to wake you up in the morning? How do you recover from training? Do you have a lot of joint pain, muscle pain? Are you sore for several days? Do you bounce back right away? Do you have a lot of cravings? What are those cravings for? Salt, sugar? Do you have bloating around the midsection? Do you have... do you eat something and feel like it just goes right through you? I mean, there's so many gut health questions. How do you respond to like a higher fat meal? Do you suspect any food sensitivities? The list goes on and on and on. So now, like, what would I actually do? So supplements is a big one, and food, supplements, and lifestyle. So food. So some people. So first of all, kind of the most obvious thing is that some people have food sensitivities, and we just need to get rid of that right away. That's kind of like, that's a no-brainer. They're not going to be gone forever, but we need to get rid of that right away. The other obvious ones are your macros and your total calories. Again, I talk about all this, and I don't want to overlook the most basic ones. So it's like, are you consuming too few calories or too many? And then the other big ones, which, and again, I can't believe I haven't mentioned this yet, but it's how much fat versus carbohydrates versus protein are you consuming? Because probably the most common, or another very, very common issue, is that people don't consume enough protein. And that's another like 5-hour conversation. But if people just think protein, they think muscle. Well, no, like there's so many amino acids in there that are being put to use for literally health of your entire body. I mean, your immune cells need it. There's precursors for neurotransmitters in your brain. Muscle is a big one. But again, people think like, if you want to burn more calories, like if you want to have a healthier metabolism, you need more lean muscle, right? Because your muscle is the biggest, it's like a furnace. Like the more muscle you have, the more calories you can handle. So these are some of the kind of the big red flags. We'll look at how much water they're consuming on a daily basis. How's your salt intake? And then, as I said, like, we'll look at, supplements, like, first of all, if you are taking some, I'll look at the quality of these. Like, are they doing anything? Because we know there's a lot of crap supplements out there. And then which extras might you benefit from? And this is different for everyone. And then we'll also look at lifestyle. So these things like, how often are you training? How stressed are you? Can we play around with these a little bit? Like, are you willing to maybe drop a training session in favor of like some yoga, or some mindfulness, relaxation? I've mentioned sleep 10 times. How can we improve that?
It seems to be the common factor of coming down, especially when we're talking with the brain. You were in Ottawa because you were in town to do a seminar, which was great. Are you often doing that so that people can come in for these one-day classes or to understand? Because you're actually not based here; you're based in London,
yep.
right? So this is London-based, but are there things on the website, or are there things that they can learn if they go to Brain Ignition? Is it .ca?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So honestly, for learning, the best place would be my Instagram account, actually.
You post there, like the last post I think had to do with man boobs.
Yeah, I have one in there about it. Yeah, so check that out.
It's like, why, you know, but that's real thing, right?
Well, and I've really been working on that lately, is turning all of this into more practical, simple stuff. So yeah, I mean, Instagram's the best spot for that. There's some stuff on the website as well, kind of things you can apply right away, certainly for everyday health. And then I am doing more and more of these seminars, which is it's my preference, because I'm sure you've got this impression today and your listeners have got this impression where I can't just give like a straight yes or no answer, because to me, that's one of the biggest problems these days, especially on social media, is people are they're just kind of spewing like this yes or no stuff, and they're not. So like the problem with that is we ignore the individuality is what's happening. We ignore the fact that everyone is different and that everyone has different needs. And so that's why I couldn't just give you those yes or no answers. I often say it depends, which really annoys people. But I mean, that's the way it is. Like if you want the best service, if you want to know what is best for your body, it depends. Like we are so much different that these things, like the fasting.
Well, it's even down to the fasting, right?
Yeah,
it depends on who you are, what your lifestyle is like, as if it's going to work for you or not. And that people see these buzzwords or they see these things on social media, like, I'm going to go try that. and they're not educated enough to know that they could be wasting their time or doing more damage than good by kind of understanding it. So I want people to know brainignition.ca. I'm doing this because I'm like way over time right now. So people can find you Brain Ignition. That's the best place. And then what's the handle on Instagram?
At brainignition_Chet.
That's the Instagram handle?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, honestly, if anyone ever has any questions about any of this stuff, about my posts, just DM me. And because I enjoy the questions. I enjoy answering these. So yeah, don't be scared. Don't be shy.
No, it's good. If people can reach out and ask the questions on the direct messaging, that's great to know that you're answering them for sure.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for staying in town a little bit longer to be able to do this after your seminars and your workshops. And also, a lot of information, and I'm glad you know, like we had the keto goddess in not long ago. So there's so many different guests and so many different topics that we're covering here on the podcast. So be sure to like, share, subscribe, let people know about the information and about the topics that we are covering. But that is your wrap on Living Your Life with Lianne Laing. Have a great day.